Okay, so you want to become a commercial pilot, get your hours, get your license, and spend your career flying to new cities, wearing the uniform, getting waved through security by people who still find pilots impressive? Airline pilots in the United States can eventually earn $200,000 to $300,000 a year at the major carriers. Global air travel keeps climbing year after year, and airlines are constantly warning about a looming pilot shortage. That's the pitch. Now here's what actually happens to most of the people who buy it. Somewhere in the middle of that climb, buried in debt, flying tiny regional planes for wages that barely cover rent, a huge share of aspiring pilots quietly walk away. What people don't really understand is that becoming a commercial pilot isn't really about learning to fly. Learning to fly is the easy part, something most reasonably coordinated adults can master in a few hundred hours. What this career actually demands is the ability to survive years of near-poverty wages and brutal working conditions on pure faith that the seniority system eventually pays off, assuming nothing derails you along the way. Understand that gamble, and every strange number in aviation starts to make sense. Start with the cost of the license itself, because unlike most careers, aviation charges you by the hour for your own education. To qualify for an entry-level commercial pilot job, you typically need at least 1,500 flight hours logged under United States regulations before an airline will even consider you for a first officer seat. Getting there requires working through a stack of certifications: private pilot license, instrument rating, commercial license, and often a flight instructor certificate, each one requiring its own training hours, written exams, and check rides at $150 to $250 an hour once you include the aircraft, rental, fuel, and instructor time. Weather delays, aircraft maintenance downtime, and instructor availability routinely stretch what should be a straightforward timeline into years rather than months. All in, most aspiring pilots spend somewhere between $80,000 and $100,000 simply reaching the minimum hours required to be hired anywhere at all, often financed through private loans since federal student aid rarely covers the full cost of flight training the way it covers a 4-year degree, and those private aviation loans frequently carry higher interest rates than standard student debt. Here's where the naive math falls apart. You'd assume that after spending 6 figures becoming a licensed pilot, you'd walk into a well-paying job immediately. In reality, almost every pilot's first job is building hours as a flight instructor, earning $25,000 to $40,000 a year, teaching student pilots the same basics they themselves just learned, purely to accumulate enough logged hours to qualify for an airline. It's an odd inversion. The newly certified pilot spends a year or two teaching total beginners in small training aircraft before they're allowed anywhere near a commercial jet. Only after clearing that 1,500-hour threshold can a pilot apply to a regional airline, and even there, starting first, officer pay historically sat as low as $30,000 to $50,000 a year, depending on the carrier and year. Despite the pilot now being legally responsible for the lives of everyone aboard a commercial aircraft, regional airline pay has climbed meaningfully in recent years due to pilot shortages and union pressure, with some regionals now advertising signing bonuses to attract candidates. But for much of the industry's history, a first-year regional pilot earned less than many entry-level office jobs, while carrying debt that dwarfed almost every other profession at that income level. Now here's where the seniority system becomes the entire story of this career. Airline pay, schedules, vacation time, and even which routes and aircraft a pilot flies are almost entirely determined by seniority, meaning years of service at that specific airline, not skill, not performance. Not how good a pilot actually is in the cockpit. A pilot who joins a major airline at 30 and stays for their entire career will out-earn, out-schedule, and outrank a pilot who joined the same airline 5 years later, with more total flight experience elsewhere. This creates enormous pressure to pick the right airline early and never leave, because switching carriers resets your seniority clock back to zero, even after decades of experience. A pilot with 20 years of seniority at one airline who moves to another airline for any reason, whether for better pay, a better base location, or simply personal preference, starts over at the very bottom of that new company's list, junior to every pilot hired there before them, regardless of total career experience, total hours flown, or rank previously held. And seniority determines something even more brutal than pay: job security itself. During economic downturns or crises that ground air travel, airlines furlough pilots strictly in reverse seniority order, meaning the newest, most junior pilots are the first ones let go, often with almost no notice. regardless of how well they fly or how much the airline invested in training them. A pilot who spent a decade building toward a major airline career can be furloughed for a year or more during a downturn, watching their hard-won seniority essentially freeze while bills continue and their skills, which require constant flight hours to stay current and certified, begin to atrophy. Some furloughed pilots take temporary jobs completely outside aviation just to stay afloat financially while waiting for recall, unsure whether that recall will come in 6 months or 3 years. So why does anyone still pursue this path? And why do some pilots end up with genuinely excellent careers, while others quietly wash out along the way? The pilots who do well are almost always the ones who got into a major airline or a well-paying cargo carrier relatively early and then simply survived, accumulating seniority year after year without a furlough, a medical disqualification, or a career-ending mistake derailing the climb. A pilot's medical certificate has to be renewed regularly throughout their entire career, sometimes every 6 or 12 months, depending on age and role. And a single disqualifying health condition, something as ordinary as certain heart conditions, vision problems, or even some commonly prescribed medications for anxiety, depression, or sleep, can end a career overnight regardless of how many hours or how much seniority that pilot has built. This is a profession where your entire livelihood depends on passing a physical exam every year for 30 or 40 years straight, and where many pilots quietly avoid seeking treatment for ordinary health issues out of fear that an honest disclosure could ground them permanently. Run the numbers on 2 versions of this career. In the realistic scenario, a pilot spends 2 years and $90,000 in debt becoming certified, spends another 2 years instructing at $30,000 a year while barely servicing loan interest, gets hired at a regional airline earning $55,000 in their first year, and after 5 years total in the industry, has only just begun approaching the debt-free, mid-career income most people assume pilots earn from day one. Factor in loan interest that's been accruing the entire time, and the true financial break-even point can stretch even further than the raw salary numbers suggest. In the strong scenario, a pilot follows the identical training path but gets hired directly into a major airline's cadet or pipeline program at 26, accumulates 15 years of seniority without a furlough, and by their early 40s is earning $250,000 to $300,000 a year as a senior captain, with excellent retirement benefits and a schedule that, despite irregular hours, only requires them to be actively flying 12 to 15 days a month. The difference between these two pilots isn't raw talent in the cockpit. It's almost entirely which airline they landed at, how early they landed there, and whether an unlucky furlough or a failed medical exam ever interrupted the climb. Now, the misconception almost everyone has walking into this career is assuming the hard part is learning to fly the plane. It isn't. The hard part is surviving the first 5 to 7 years of near-poverty wages and total uncertainty long enough to reach the seniority system that eventually rewards you while staying medically qualified, professionally spotless, and financially solvent the entire time. The pilots who make it aren't necessarily the most talented ones in the sky. They're the ones who understood, from the very beginning, that this career was less a meritocracy and more an endurance test, and who simply outlasted everyone who quit somewhere in the middle.